this cold that has been going around, so it feels a little surreal to be here. I've been used to being alone and in bed all week, and now I'm standing in front of people.
I'm glad you're sharing it.
Well, thanks. We're a community. Jim, we're a community, and I feel that which comes to me I ought to share. We're celebrating today the last day of the church year. Next Sunday is the first Sunday of Advent, and this is our year. This is the rhythm of our year. And so this concludes, and we do with a feast called Christ the King, which may sound very ancient, but it was actually begun in 1925. And that was a period when a lot of the papal power was sort of being used to restrict access to books and things like that. The Pope turned out to be a pretty good guy and actually stood up to the Nazis in the years following the institution of this feast day. And of course it's a funny feast, Christ the King, because to proclaim him king is to enter into the world of paradox. It's to enter into the world where Jesus persistently refused this title during his lifetime. People wanted him to be king, and he said, no, I'm not that kind of king. That's not where my power is. And so in preparation for today, I'd like to reflect a little bit on power. I'd like to go back into Israel's history and then jump forward into Christianity's history, and then go back to Jesus to see what kind of a king he might really be and how, interestingly, he invites us to share in his royal prerogatives. So the first incident goes back into the ancient history of Israel, probably 1200, 1100 before the Common Era. And it's the time when Israel itself decided to choose for themselves a king. Huge decision in the life of Israel. And up until that point, they had been a tribal federation with an essentially ad hoc form of government. Whenever there was need among the people, they were living in the sense of trust that they would have the resources and the leadership to rise up and meet that need. But of course, that is kind of living hand to mouth in terms of political leadership. And the people said, we don't. This feels too uncertain to us. This feels too uncertain, too insecure. We want a king. We want to be like other nations. We want a king. And Samuel, one of the great sort of early prophets, and I think this is worth reading in full, because he says, "You want a king, do you? Are you sure?" He says, Samuel reported all the words of the Lord to the people who were asking him for a king, and he said, "These will be the ways of the king who will reign over you. He will take your sons and appoint them to his chariots and to be his horsemen and to run before his chariots. And he will appoint for himself commanders of thousands and commanders of 50s, and to some to plow his ground and to reap his harvest, and to make his implements of war and the equipments of his chariots. He will take your daughters to be perfumers and cooks and bakers. He will take the best of your fields and vineyards and olive orchards and give them to his courtiers. He will take 1/10 of your grain and of your vineyards and give it to his officers and his courtiers. He will take your male and female slaves and the best of your cattle and donkeys and put them to his work. He will take 1/10 of your flocks, and you shall be his slaves. And in that day you will cry out because of your king, whom you have chosen for yourselves. But the Lord will not answer you in that day." But the people refused to listen to the voice of Samuel. They said, "No, but we are determined to have a king over us, so that we also may be like the other nations, and that our king may govern us and go out before us and fight our battles." When Samuel had heard all the words of the people, he repeated them in the ears of the Lord. The Lord said to Samuel, "Listen to their voice and set a king over them." Which is to say, I read you this long passage, but I hope what you heard is you want a king to serve your interests, but believe me, the moment you get a king, you will serve his interests. Which is to say, the principle that is being invoked here, and I think it's pretty consistent through history, is that when you institutionalize power, that power starts to serve itself. And so you get kind of a flip of the situation where you had this tribal confederacy, which in theory at least was responsive to need and responsive to God. And now you've got this institution. And Samuel says, and it will serve itself, and it will make you serve that power. That's the way power runs on earth. Are you sure you want it? And they said, yes, we think it will make us more secure. And that begins this long, long history in the life of Israel, where you get some good kings, but mostly corrupt. And then you also get the phenomenon of prophecy, the prophets who stand in opposition to the king. It's the ancient system of checks and balances. You have all this power concentrated here. You've got to have somebody who can stand up to power and say, actually, what about this, and what about this, and what about this? And though that often cost the prophets their lives, because power doesn't like to be challenged, nonetheless, the prophets consistently spoke out against the abuses of power. So, as long as everyone else heard it. If I belong, I'm not so worried. So here's this incident in the early life of Israel, and then jump forward to one of the decisive events of of our Christian history, which is, of course, in the early 4th century, when Constantine reversed centuries of tolerance at best, persecution at worst, reversed those policies and endorsed Christianity, and really essentially made it the religion of the Roman Empire, and so aligned Christianity with imperial power. And it wasn't too long before a figure like St. Augustine was writing justifications for using imperial troops to, and the words are ominous. They have this ominous ring. It's from one of the parables of Jesus, where the invited guests made excuses, and the king got enraged and then went out into the streets and said, "Compel them to come in." And that was one of the phrases that Augustine used. Compel them to come in. Let's use imperial troops. Let's use imperial troops to quell dissent, to enforce uniformity, to make sure the church runs according to the preferences of the emperor. And so the church embraced the kind of power that Jesus... What is that?
I thought I turned it off. It resurrected itself.
Well, let's reserve resurrection for a technical theological term. Maybe it revived itself.
You want to step on it or something?
No, I just wanted to be quiet. So, Israel in its early days and church in its early days embraced the kind of power that Jesus renounced. And please remember that during the lifetime of Jesus, he was surrounded by people who wanted him to take upon himself the power that is reflected in Israel's kings, the power that is reflected in the Roman government. They wanted him to be powerful. They wanted him to drive out the Romans and reestablish Israel as a sovereign and free nation. And the words, I think of these words from the Song of Zechariah. Through his holy prophets, he promised of old that he would save us from our enemies, from the hands of all who hate us. And in the life of Jesus, during his lifetime, people heard that promise in a very literal way. He will drive out the Romans. He will set us free politically. And yet Jesus, throughout his lifetime, exercised a completely different kind of power. And the power is in evidence in the gospel that we heard today. For as he is being crucified, he prays, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing. And in this utterance, I think you see the fullness of Jesus in his royal power, because he is exercising absolute sovereign freedom. I mean, what is the salient characteristic of a sovereign, of a king or queen? Nobody tells them what to do. They are free in their realm. And Jesus was exercising the most radical kind of freedom, which is to say, you can't tell me how to feel, how to act, or how to behave. My freedom, and of course for Jesus, it was the freedom to be as God is. I can only do what I see the Father doing, says Jesus. Well, his freedom was the freedom not to be caught up in this kind of nightmarish golden rule where I'm going to do to you as you have done to me. The nightmare golden rule. I'm going to do to you as you have done to me. And Jesus says, actually, in my sovereign freedom, in my exercise of kingship, I am going to behave as I choose to behave. And I see you crucifying me out of your blindness and out of your fear and out of your ignorance. And in the moment that you are putting me to death, I am going to pray for your liberation and pray to God that you wake up. Father, don't condemn them for this because they're acting out of blindness and fear and ignorance. Bring them to life, O Father, even as they put me to death. And this is Jesus in his most kingly act, which is to say, and the other kingly act that I might put this right alongside would be Jesus washing his disciples' feet. And he was not being disingenuous. He says, you call me Lord and Master, and you're right, because I am. He was not being disingenuous about his spiritual authority, the power that was really in him. You call me Lord and Master, and rightly, for so I am. And this is how it exercises itself. I'm on my knees, washing your feet, serving you, trying to bring you into the power and the freedom of my kingship. That's what I'm trying to do for you. And Jesus knew, you can neither make people do what's right for them, nor can you prevent them from doing what's wrong for them. Samuel could not prevent the people of Israel from subjugating themselves to a king. And Jesus could invite people to the feast of the kingdom, but could not, as Augustine thought, he could not compel them to come in. The king whom we serve invites us freely, and he invites us into a realm where we don't have any power over others, but we have the most radical power over ourselves, the radical freedom to be as we choose to be, not defined by the people who hate us, who are our enemies, with whom we're in conflict. They can't force me to do anything that I don't choose. And that's our Lord, our King, the humblest King, the King who is on his knees serving, who never exercises power over other people, but always invites his followers into the power that all of us share. Gracious King, good King, perhaps, not perhaps, of all those who have ever lived, the one of whom we can truly say, ah yes, the good King, the good King.